So for our conversation today, we are seeking to address this new challenge, as well as the accompanying opportunities that come with these challenges. And we will do so drawing upon the knowledge and the experience and the expertise of the speakers who will be sharing with us today. Before I introduce them to you, let me point out that this webinar is also being live streamed on the WCC YouTube channel. We know that you will have lots of questions, and maybe those questions could be directed to a particular speaker or in general. We're asking that you would please be so kind as to post your questions or comments in the chat section of the live stream video on the WCC YouTube channel. So welcome again. And as we begin our conversation today, we do so with Professor Heidi Campbell, who is the Professor of Communication and the Affiliate Faculty in Religious Studies and a Presidential Impact Fellow at the Texas A&M University. She is also the Director of the Network for New Media, Religion, and Digital Cultural Studies. Professor Campbell's research focuses on the intersections between technology, religion, and digital culture, with a particular emphasis on Jewish, Muslim, and Christian negotiations with digital media. Certainly, she comes to us with a wealth of experience and knowledge, and in particular of interest to us, she has just edited a new ebook called Distant Church, Reflections on Doing Church Online. And so we begin our conversation today with Professor Heidi Campbell. Welcome, and we turn it over to you.
Good morning, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you today. I'm going to be speaking about the new ebook that I just launched last week. And if you don't know my work, I've spent the last 25 years studying the relationship between religious communities and the internet. So, and the theme of community, and especially how people's involvement in the internet changes their view of what a religious community is and what a church environment is, have been of particular interest. So over the last 2 months, I've been very kind of curious to see how different churches have adapted and adopted digital technology. What I began to notice about in mid-March one day is that normally on a Sunday morning when I tune in, I would see maybe 2 or 3 different streams on Facebook Live of people streaming their services. But in the middle of March, I was surprised to see over 20 of these services pop up on my feed, and with more and more coming each week. And so I began to see that we're in an interesting moment, and I wanted to kind of capture that, which is what this ebook is about, of looking at both pastoral perspectives and researcher perspectives on doing church in the digital age, and especially the move from offline church to online church. So with my very brief comments, I'm going to give a summary of kind of my essay in the book, and then I'm going to move on to kind of giving some of the key findings that we can see that the pastors, that if they were to have a conversation, and the researchers about what they kind of see as some of the challenges and the new trends that are emerging in this very short period of time. So my chapter is chapter 17. It talks about what religious groups need to consider when trying to do church online. So within the last 8 weeks, I've noticed 3 dominant trends emerging in how people practice religion online. Some are using what I call a transfer strategy, others a translate strategy, and a few are using a transformation strategy. And so I want to talk about those really briefly. So the transfer strategy is those churches that are looking to kind of bring their church quickly online. Oftentimes this is the first time that they have used digital technology or considered live streaming or webcasting their services. And so the transfer method is really taking the church directly as it is an offline environment online. And you can see by these pictures here, sometimes it's actually standing at the front of the church with a camera, just trying to capture the priest or the minister delivering the service, maybe with 1 or 2 people accompanying them, or in some cases, because of social distancing, creating an altar at home, like St. Luke's minister is doing, John Flogberg, as he's trying to kind of introduce the service in his home, a home altar on Palm Sunday. So the transfer method is simply transferring from the offline to the online context. And this is really a good first step for many places, but there's obviously some limitations because the online environment isn't designed the way the offline is, and it really creates a more kind of passive and just like a broadcast experience as if you were broadcasting on television. Other churches that I've noticed have been doing what I call a translate strategy. And that is oftentimes with a minister who's maybe more familiar with digital technology, or they've maybe used it in the past. So instead of just kind of viewing or filming the church service itself, they try to modify the church service to either fit in the screen or a format that may be kind of more conducive to the digital environment. And so we see kind of, again, pictures of maybe the minister at home, but sitting in his study, offering some kind of reflections and making it more conversational rather than just preaching the sermon, or instead of doing, the mass, maybe translating it into kind of like a talk show. We see at the bottom screen a shot from Church Restore Austin, and we have the minister kind of giving some announcements, and then we'll move to a special musical guest, which will be the worship music and for this church service, and then moving on to the sermon and maybe a conversation with the special guest, which might be someone from the church, but trying to make it a bit more informal and also kind of connect with the people in the sense that, we're not in the church environment anymore, but we want to give you a church experience and connect with the community. The third strategy I call translation. And this is really kind of a point when churches are more familiar with the technology, or the ministers in church are willing to be more experimental, and seeing that, we want to bring the church worship Sunday event to the people, but we realize that also there are limitations because of the technology and that we're under unusual circumstances. And then the third thing to realize is that we have this unique interactive environment. So how can we best leverage that? And so in these cases, we see kind of the pastor might create like what we call in the US a fireside chat moment. We see an image of a pastor, Stevie Voy from a Free Methodist Church in Michigan, kind of offering people to come and study. And he meets with his church every night online and has these informal conversations. And then the Sunday event basically kind of strings together some of the thoughts that he shared, as well as the feedback he's received from those kind of conversations, making it more of a continuous kind of experience. We also see some churches trying to combine the idea of kind of a traditional worship event, as we see Bryony Taylor, a Church of England minister, trying to kind of bring the portions of the Mass into her home, but then also offering interactive events. We see for Palm Sunday, she literally encouraged people to create palms on their crosses on their palms, and she had people send those from her congregation in so they could kind of virtually take part in a procession and an experience of kind of Palm Sunday together. So trying to create more interactive events. So we see with all three of these strategies, people trying to kind of adopt and adapt to this new environment. And as we know, many people have had to make this shift very quickly. And the first time they came online was maybe the first Sunday that they were because of policies or announcements, they weren't actually able to meet physically. And so I encourage you to kind of keep these kind of three strategies of mind, and you can read more about them in my chapter about as kind of different ways to adapt and adopt, with the idea of transformation maybe being a place of churches encouraging them to experiment more with what the online environment can offer or should offer. So this the book is really an experiment, and it comes out of my an earlier work called Network Theology, where I brought into conversation a theologian friend of mine who is based in New Zealand with my work. Stephen Garner is trained as a computer professional, but later went back and did a PhD in theology. I started my work out as a journalist in media culture and working with technology, and then went back to do a PhD. So I'm a firm believer, understand what's happening in the church now, as well as to learn from one another. We need to bring both church professionals and media professionals together, both people who are experts in theology and experts who are in research together. And so this book is a conversation of bringing 15 pastors together. And these are 15 ministers that are friends of mine, all on my Facebook feed, that I've been watching and interacting with over a period of time, to talk about some of the trends that they're seeing. So if we look at kind of all the essays together, and we have essays from people in Switzerland and in the UK, the US, and Canada. We have 12 different denominations represented in the book. What we see is three kind of key or common themes that many of the essays and pastors are pointing to. One is that moving the church online represents a new kind of relationship between the online and offline. So one thing that pastors are struggling with is saying, well, we've always been an offline entity and maybe we use media, but how do we kind of connect these two spaces, especially when we've kind of asked people or not allowed people to gather in the offline space into the online space. So how do we rethink the relationship of church just being embodied experience to maybe immediate experience for this time, or maybe in a combination in the future? A second theme that the pastors talked about is just this issue of social distance, which gets talked about and used in different phrases in different cultures and nations, but the idea that we're physically separated from ourselves. And so in that kind of trying to create an alternative, create a church experience that bridges that gap, we need to remember that there are people on the other side of the screen. One of the challenges they felt is that because some of them were having to do quick trainings and learn technology so quickly, they got so wrapped up in the bells and whistles of the technology, they forgot, it was easy to overlook that this was actually supposed to be a community experience and not just a technological experience. And third, many of the ministers began to realize as they're trying to make the move online that there's a lot of vulnerable populations that are challenged with this going online digital. There's a challenge of what if your congregation don't have access to digital media or don't have digital skills? What happens if they're an older population or in a place where there's just not as much connectivity? So and maybe there's some people in a church that would be well suited to kind of meet in a mediated way. So how do you create alternatives so that those people aren't left out because they're left out of the digital space? These are some of the questions that pastors are talking about. In the second part of the book, I call it Wisdom from the Scholars. So people like me who've been spending anywhere from 5 to 20 years looking at digital environments, both from a theological perspective as well as a media perspective. And when you look at these kind of different voices, they're coming from theology, media studies, sociology of religion. Three themes start to also emerge. The one is that the hope is that this period of social distancing will lead the church to an examination of what the church is and supposed to be. One of the big findings here and conversation points in the US has been that the church pastors are recognizing that church has mostly become an event. Something as the Sunday worship experience is the central expression of church. But is that the way it's supposed to be? How might social distancing and its stepping back and forcing us to look into ways be a place to reevaluate and maybe even recreate some of what the church is or how it lives out that mission? Secondly, is the awareness that digital literacy is important, and that this is something that people have had to get in the church up to speed on very quickly, but maybe this is something that needs to become part of the church, whether it's training of ministers or just conversations of how do we kind of use the digital platform, how do we understand the technology, but also how do we understand the digital culture that's surrounded and formed around that. The digital media, whether you're using Facebook or YouTube, it creates a certain kind of platform with a certain set of expectations. And understanding how putting your service into that particular environment is important to see how people are going to receive it, as well as begin to interpret what church is. And finally, researchers are calling for, they hope that this new relationship that's forming will create a new understanding between digital media and the church. Many churches have been kind of digitally hesitant over the last decade or two, concerned about what maybe the moral or ethical implications of using digital technology and what it does to faith, what it does to relationships such as caring and valuing one another. So the move online very quickly has been kind of one that's been done begrudgingly, but it's causing some interesting conversations. So the hope is that this kind of move and the forced move online will cause a new relationship or a new evaluation of how technology can be used in positive ways and how we can culture it in line with the values of the church. And so that's my brief presentation. I just want to thank you for the opportunity to talk through my book. This ebook is available free and online, and I believe the WCC has provided a link to that. Or you can kind of go to my website, the Network for New Media Religion Digital Culture Studies, or even send me an email and I can send you a link to getting a free copy of the book. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Campbell, and certainly for that very intriguing presentation. And yes, the ebook is available online, so you can always go to the WCC webpage and you will see there a link, the news article that highlights today's presentation, and the ebook is certainly available. We recommend it. Please read it, share it as widely as possible. Thank you so much. With that background and with that foundation, we now want to get some practical examples from various parts of the faith community. And before I do that, let me say to our participants, our presenters, that we are actually getting some wonderful greetings from all over the world, from Germany, the UK, the US, from Brazil, from Poland, Latvia, France, so the whole world, Finland, Serbia, South Africa, Netherlands, Denmark. So I hope we all have our best face on since we are going global. But we are certainly thankful for those who are joining us. And it dawned on me, I didn't say who I was. I am Reverend Dr. Mikey Roberts, the Program Executive for Spiritual Life for the World Council of Churches. We're now going to go to South Korea. And we really want to hear now from our pastor who is representing that region, Reverend Jonggoo Kim. I hope I got that correct this time. All right. And Reverend Kim is a member of the Executive Committee of the Christian Conference of Asia, CCA, and also a member of the International Relations Committee of the National Council of Churches in Korea. He has served on the Amity Foundation as mission co-worker and at the Korean Church in Oakland, California in the United States. He is the lead pastor of the Seshin Methodist Church in Seoul, South Korea, and his congregation has about a membership of approximately 2,000. And of course, they've had to quickly adapt to worshiping online with families over the last few weeks. So, Reverend Kim, we hand it over to you, and we are anxious to hear how your church in South Korea is adhering in these new times.
Okay. 안녕하십니까? It's in Korean. Now it's almost midnight in Korea, so good evening from Seoul, Korea. Thank you for having me at this very meaningful webinar, and I'm very honored to participate and share my experience related to COVID-19 pandemic. The topic given to me today is online experience of churches during lockdown in Korea. First of all, let me start with the challenges we had. When the Korean government imposed a strong, there is some technical problem here, sorry. Oh, no, okay. Let me start with the challenges we had when the Korean government imposed strong social distancing. Many of our church members were very disappointed as we cannot gather at the church physically. But we had to comply with the policy as we also concerned about our neighbors' safety and health. Therefore, my church immediately transformed the traditional worship service and activities into online format, including a Sunday worship service, early morning devotion, Bible study, and also a Methodist class meeting, which means a small gathering, and also youth gathering, etc. Although we have to comply with the social distancing. We cannot distance ourselves from our neighbors. The church had to protect neighbors' lives and to serve them. This is exactly what Professor Campbell already mentioned. So we decided to set up a small factory within the church that produce face masks to be distributed to our neighbors. Instead of making Easter eggs, we've decided to manufacture the title of Easter face mask, sharing the joy of the resurrections. Because of this decision, at that time, we had very difficult time because of the lack of masks. So we decided to make masks by ourselves and also neighbors. Amazingly, when we discussed this idea, many church members loved the idea and also actively participated to make an Easter mask, sharing the joy of resurrection. The biggest advantage is that you can wash and reuse it. And also it is 100% of cotton, eco-friendly mask. So this is, you can wash and reuse. So, and we are going to make these masks for 6 weeks of whole Easter season. So we will continue to produce and provide the masks to share the joy of Easter and the love of God. It will be distributed to our neighbors in need and migrants and refugees, and even internationally shared through our missionary network. Second, I'll tell you the lessons we learned during this season. Although our society had strong social distancing, but it does not mean the church is totally locked down. Our home became the place to worship. I may say that invisible church is being built and expanded within our home and also our family members. Because some family members who don't go to church normally, but this time they can worship together when they had online service at home. This is a very good experience and positive effect of transformation of our worship service. At the same time, there are still ongoing debates among church leaders in Korea. If the current online worship service system continues, it might bring about negative effect on Christians' life, that they might distance themselves from the church. Lastly, I'd like to share my concerns and expectations on online ministry. First, it seems that people's religious lives were mostly centered around the church itself. And this was challenged hard by the fourth industrial revolution nowadays. In fact, churches were slow to adopt new technology, while other parts of the society were already finished with the transition. I'm sure that we have tightened that gap through this opportunity of the COVID-19 era. Second, there seems to be some fears in ministry. People not coming to offline worship service or churches. This is intensified as they can see the amount of offering, this donation, is decreasing. Lastly, nevertheless, we are living through the fourth industrial revolution era. Even if it wasn't the COVID-19, we still have to change our traditional way of going to church, reading the Bible, meeting with people, etc. Therefore, we need to take a step forward, creating new pattern of the religious lifestyle in the context of the fourth industrial revolution by actualizing and materializing online ministry. This is all I prepared to share with you today, and I wish all of you stay safe and healthy. God bless you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reverend Kim, for your very thought-provoking and a wonderful presentation, sharing with us from the South Korean context. We really, really do appreciate that. We will move along, and this time we will now go to our next presenter, Peter Reimann, and he has studied computer science and technology. He was a web team leader in the Evangelical Church in Germany and a pastor with the portal Evangelical Church. And currently he is the Internet Commissioner of the Evangelical Church in the Rhineland and Vice President of the World Association of Christian Communication, World Association, so in the European region. So WACC Europe. So Peter, welcome, and hand it over to you.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me, because like sometimes Germany is not a very good internet country. So I switched to my cell phone, but the internet didn't improve. So I hope you can show my slides, and I hope you can hear me. I told the kids to get off YouTube, but nobody's here on YouTube, so I hope it's working. I'm sharing with you the experience we had in Germany in the mainline Protestant church, how we had to deal with the coronavirus and how it changed our church life. So maybe you can switch to the next slide. And I'm happy I could share this experience also in the book Heidi mentioned, so you can really read and go to the depth of our experience here in Germany. And one of the key learnings is that the church is we used to consider, or if you speak in Germany of the church, it seems that the church is a physical building. But what we came to realize, of course, theologically, we already knew that, but what we really had to come to learn, maybe even a little bit the hard way, is that the church is people. And so the church really had to gain digitally, had to learn a lot how to do digital communication, and also that community and communion things. If you go to the next slide, okay, can you change to the next slide, please? What we had to do is to learn a different way of doing church, and the key phrase was church at home, and this became the guiding principle. So normally the way the church is structured in Germany is if you have a postal address, you can look up a database and tell somebody which parish he or she belongs to. So very much is based on the location, and also the parishes are organized according to geographical areas, and also they assume that people know where the church is. So the idea is you go to church, you come to the church building. And what happened now is if you no longer can come to the church building and church is done at home, maybe even online, then the church has to reach out to the people, and you have to walk the other way around. So not expect people to come to church, but also people go, and the church has to come to the people. What we learned is that churches who had already understood that principle, that you have to reach out to the people, who did social media, who had contacts in their databases, whether it's email or it's the Facebook list or whatever, these churches were a lot better prepared to deal with the situation. And churches who did not have this connection and this mentality, they had to learn very, very fast. So the people could no longer go to church, so the church had to go to the people and had to be brought into their members' home. If you look at the next slide, please. This is something really interesting. We have put around 700 of our church buildings into Google My Business. And here you can see, and this is really interesting, that is the blue line is when people actually clicked on Google and said, give me a direction to the church. So there were people, if you go to whatever, like a baptism, or if you are in a different city, you want to go to church, you look up the church on Google Maps and you say click, and of course on your cell phone you down. But at the same time, people going to the church's website through a Google search, through a Google search really goes up, and you always have peaks on Sundays, and there's like 2 peaks next to each other, and this is of course Good Friday and Easter Sunday. So you can really see that people look for the churches digitally. So what we also learned is that when we do church online, we reach different people than people who would actually go to the parish, build into the church in the parish and attend service physically. But people are ready to do this digitally and look up on a Sunday morning where the church is online and then look up and go to a service. If you go to the next slide, this is really our understanding that the church is no longer reduced to a building, but it's people coming together in prayer and living their faith. And what is really challenging now is, since we have had this experience, will this also translate to a new way of doing church after the lockdown, after the corona pandemic is over? So this is something which will be really interesting to see. And also, of course, the economy is suffering, also the churches will be suffering. So we probably will not have that much money any longer. So how will we do church with less resources? So if we've learned the lesson that people are more important than physical buildings, this might also be a good finding to go to the time after the corona crisis. The next slide shows, and this is something that is also important, I think, is we always talk a lot about live streaming. And I think live streaming is very important, and it's for many, many churches the right way to do it, but to do online church. But for example, we also in Mexico, and we attend a small migrant church, and there, for example, the WhatsApp Messenger was the most important medium of communication among the parishes. Among what we do is we actually do service as a group chat every Sunday morning, and Spanish-speaking people don't get up that early in the morning, so it's 11:30 every morning, every Sunday morning, that we do a live chat on WhatsApp, and the sermon is brought in as a YouTube link. But what you can see here on the slide is that people say hello, they greet each other, and they say the city where they are coming from. So you actually, through this group chat, you make it visible who is attending the service, and you see the people where they are at the moment. And quite often it's not one person, but it's a family attending church. So what is really important if you do church online is, and if you don't see the neighbor you're sitting next to in church, right on the right or left side, hand side, or before or behind you, is to make it visible who is part of the worship community. And here this screen shows it. It's really important to do that, and you can do that on WhatsApp. But for example, one of our experiences also, if you do live streaming, that you ask people to greet the community, for example, in the commentary section of YouTube, so you see who is worshiping with you. And that is important to make people visible during the online worship service, so you have a community experience if you do worship online. If you do it physically in a church building, you know who's next to you, but online, you have to make sure that this is also visible. The next slide, please. This is also one thing that, this was a question for many churches. We have, every Sunday morning, we have a television service on national television. And this is really beautiful service, very good music, a very, very good liturgy, a very good sermon. So one idea for some parishes was, okay, why don't we just point out people and tell to the television and say, just watch a service. The parish, if they have to go and they can't do high quality pastor, that they actually see if it's streamed from within their community, that you know the people who are watching the stream. So it's not so much that the quality of the video stream is important, but it's the people who do it. And of course, if you live in a lockdown and if you don't have physical contact with the community, contact online becomes a lot more important. So, and people are wondering, why should we do live streaming? It's not that you have to compete with television, but you have to do it because you are a community. So the digital church is also a local church. And one question is, will this understanding also be transferred to the time after the coronavirus pandemic? For example, will parishes continue live streaming to reach out to people who can't go to the church physically because they live in a nursing home, for example, or because they can't? Now, for example, church services will be resumed in Germany and will become legal again. But of course, if you belong to a high-risk group, it'll be hard to go to church. So in order to be inclusive, the church should continue to do live streaming, and it's important that it's the local church. The next slide is also one thing that is one observation is that we reached out to new people, because sometimes there are more people watching the live stream than they used to attend church physically. But of course, it's a different audience, it's different people. And this is interesting. So if we changed the medium of communication, we also attracted a different audience, partially different audience. And we also try to keep them within the church if we can resume the physical church life again. So this is one thing we should learn from the crisis again. And the last finding is it shows that if you, can you show the last slide, please? Already shared the last. That in the internet, you are more likely to express yourself. In Germany, church life used to be in the mainline Protestant churches very traditional. So the pastor would say the prayers. The congregation would participate maybe in the liturgy and in singing, but normally they wouldn't, for example, write up their own prayer requests, and the prayer requests of the congregation wouldn't be read aloud in an intercessory prayer in the service. Online, this has become very normal, that people post their prayers and then that they are being prayed for in the online worship service. So online church has become more participatory. This is also a good thing for us, and I hope we will keep this experience also if we move forward. And the last slide shows you, for example, how this was done in a YouTube stream, how we combine, for example, this is like a Twitter wall, and this is shown in the YouTube stream, so people who are watching it also can see the prayers that came in on YouTube. And also the pastor who was conducting the service in that church also sees what is happening on YouTube. And so we try to link together these two experiences. And this will be very challenging because if church services can be resumed, we still want congregations to broadcast their services because there are people who belong to high-risk groups for whom it's not advisable to go to church. So we have to link the physical church experience to the online experience. So we are talking about hybrid worship services. And this will be the next challenge for us. And I hope that we will have learned the lesson and make also these hybrid services very participatory. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Peter, for sharing. And I'm so happy that we got through even with all of the internet challenges, but we were able to follow you and we understood clearly all that you had presented. So thanks so much for that. We now go to the US, and we will be hearing now from the Orthodox perspective. And we have with us the Reverend Dr. Nicolas Kazarian, and he brings the best of both worlds. He's also originally from France and now based in the US. He serves currently as the ecumenical officer and the director for the Department of Inter-Orthodox and Ecumenical and Interfaith Relations at the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America. He has written quite a number of various publications about the Orthodox Church and the ecumenical dialogue. And he also is executive assistant to the chairman of the Assembly of Canonical Orthodox Bishop in the US. So, Father Nicolas, we're happy to have you, and we now turn it over to you.
Thank you. Give me 1 second to share my screen. All right. All right. So good morning, everyone. Christ is risen, and best wishes to all of you during this Easter season. Here in New York City, you may have heard that we're still the epicenter of the pandemic, and we continue to shelter in place. Our churches remain closed, at least in the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America. We continue to have liturgical services behind closed doors with a skeleton crew of only a priest, a cantor, and a server that will help in the altar. So across all communities, we have seen voices rising against our churches closing their doors. And I think that's not only for in the Orthodox Church. And in a response to this, His All Holiness Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew has these beautiful words. Perhaps some of you have felt that these drastic measures undermine or harm our faith. However, that which is at stake is not our faith, it is the faithful. It is not Christ, it is our Christians. It is not the divine man, but human beings. And today we stay home. To stay home is to live the radicalness of the gospel. A general Christian ethos is an ethos of solidarity, of love for our neighbors. And during a virtual town hall meeting, His Eminence Archbishop Elpidophorus of America pointed out, these special times have brought special measures. COVID-19 has changed the way we conduct our ministries for the service of the people. Even though the means are different, the essence of our pastoral work remains identical, to praise God who offered salvation for all of humankind. So for Archbishop Elpidophorus, reflecting the centrality of divine services and liturgies as part of this Orthodox spiritual identity, the priority was to keep church services offered as much as possible with or without live stream. The first mission of the church and its clergy is to pray for the world and for the life of the world. This is why the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese has put so much emphasis on online services through his internet ministry. I would like to share with you some result of a recent survey prepared by Alex Grindach. And even if the sample is small, less than 100 churches were involved in it, it gives us an idea of the importance of the internet in parish ministries during the time of COVID-19. To the question, which best describes your current situation with worship services, 47% answered that because of the pandemic, they began to live stream their services. It is also indicates that more than half of Orthodox parishes use live stream today. The next figure deals with online worship services. I think it's very interesting to see that Facebook has become the central platform to share the streaming. It goes back to the very nature, in my mind, of social media, which is not only about watching, but also allows participation. it was said in other presentation, people respond with love reaction, thumbs up, or even write messaging during the service. It's like people in church in the pews chatting, but they're chatting online. People, so we can see who in our group of friends also watches the service too, and it reproduces a sense of community and connectivity. So in a conversation with one of my parishioners in my church in St. Eleftherios in Manhattan, I was amazed by one of her comments when she said, watching live stream services is like having the prayer of the church come into my home. And I didn't know that was possible. All faithful have found very creative ways to be real participants in live stream liturgical services, especially during the services of Holy Week and Pascha. This transformation of our home into churches takes multiple forms. The position of the body, you're sitting, you're standing, the way if you use incense, candles, to bow your heads, to make the sign of your cross, to enact the processions with the flowers, especially during Holy Friday night. There's been a very moving creativity among our faithful in conjunction of the use of online technology. And I would like to point to the well-received social media campaign of Archbishop Peter Reimann, Come Receive the Light, during which His Eminence virtually shared the light of Easter with the rest of the faithful. And that was extremely moving to see him, dressing up, starting chanting Christos Anesti, the hymns of Easter, and sharing the light as if we were in church. Other avenues were explored to foster relationship through online ministries. Allow me to mention some of them that received very good feedback, like the daily prayers by His Eminence Archbishop Peter Reimann for COVID-19 victims, sick people, and also dead people from the St. Paul Chapel at the Archdiocese headquarters, where people are invited to send names to be commemorated. And he commemorates hundreds of names every day, not only from America, but from all around the world. Other project that had very good impact, the virtual town halls, allowing people to ask questions directly to His Eminence, Bible studies, youth groups, Sunday school, also sometimes coffee hour online, and some support groups through Zoom. We're also working on promoting online donations, because you know how our parishes are hurt by the financial crisis, and the virtual environment also creates for us a new opportunity to be able to raise money for our communities. And these options, the many options we have here, are available in resource centers of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese, the upper picture, and also from the Assembly of Canonical Orthodox Bishops of the United States, to make sense of all the different projects that are out there. So while online ministries are certainly a gift in times of crisis, we also have to acknowledge the limits linked to the use of technology. Professor Campbell mentioned it already. It was very interesting also to the access to internet, as there is also an inequality in terms of accessing internet and live streaming. But there is also internet fatigue. After your 5th Zoom meeting, I'm not sure you want to attend a church service online. You want real people. You want bones and flesh. But there's also more challenges when it comes to the participation in the sacramental life of the Orthodox Church, receiving Holy Communion, hearing confession, celebrating funerals under many restrictions. And this is not to mention the many baptisms and weddings that have been postponed because of COVID-19. So finally, as the crisis evolves and may continue in time, the pastoral response is being reviewed by the hierarchy here in America. Rollback strategies are being considered, and the need for technology and virtual ministry is still very necessary trajectory as we slowly come out from the pandemic. But being Christian is to be in communion and to find in communion the source of our salvation. Online ministries help us to strengthen our sense of communion and community, while there is a real thirst to reconnect with the sacramental life of the church and with one another. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Father Nicolas, for that real wonderful perspective and showing us indeed from the Orthodox faith tradition how exactly this pandemic is being approached. So we appreciate that so much. Our final presenter for this evening comes to us from Norway. She is Ingeborg Dybvig, and she is the communications director in the Church of Norway, and she has been doing that since 2015. However, before then, she would have held executive positions in Europe and has had extensive experience in external and internal communications, as well as a very broad background in journalism. She is one who is very knowledgeable about the digital presence of the Church of Norway, and she has been a vital part of that church's online ministry. And so we are happy to have her with us. And now we turn it over to you, Ingeborg. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be able to be part of this. So thank you for inviting me. For the Church of Norway, an increased digital presence has been a main focus for or since 2019. And the reason is simple. We think that we need to be where people are, and they are online. And in Norway, just some few facts, we are about 5 million people in Norway. And Church of Norway used to be a state church, and we are not a state church anymore, but still 3.7 million of the population is a member of the Church of Norway. But it's important to know that more than half of the members are not active. They go to church very rarely, and most of the times they go when it's linked to, for instance, baptism or a wedding or a funeral. Of course, we entered a completely new stage on the 11th of March, when all the churches were closed down as part of the lockdown of the country. And since then, we have done quite a lot of the similar things as you already have presented in different other countries. The communication team for Church of Norway on national level, we are 8 persons, and we had to, of course, completely restructure how we worked, and we had to put a lot of other tasks on hold. And we also have been working very closely with the communication people who are working around in the different dioceses in Norway. So if you switch to the next slide, this is just some few numbers of what happened during these last 4 weeks, or well, between 12th of March, 12th of April. We have used Facebook as our main channel, but we have also we've done quite a lot on TikTok as well, of course targeted to the younger population, and Instagram. We also have had a digital prayer wall for several years, and that has also been quite popular during these weeks. Yes, please, next. So our strategy is probably the same as in many other countries. It has been to give hope in an insecure world. And even though the church doors are closed, the church is open and available. And it's when everything happened, we of course started with digital services and digital morning and evening prayers and so on. But it has evolved into a lot of different type of programs. We kind of set up not a TV channel as such, but we have put sort of almost like a TV channel with programs at the same time every day, so that people know what to find, what to expect. And we are producing quite a lot of it ourselves on a national level, but of course we are also cooperating closely with local churches around the whole country. So next, please. Just one example, one of the kind of the best prayers and devotion with one priest, Sunniva. It was a 5-minute movie posted on Monday, 23rd of March, and it had a really, really good reach. This is just one example of many. We have the same experience as some of you mentioned, that actually streaming directly from different churches have been important to get a glimpse of the local church. But at the same time, we also see that people are telling us that it's fantastic to be able to visit churches in different parts of the countries where they don't live. So there are kind of, we don't think that this local and national level is, it might not be so important actually. Yes, please, next. We started off right away when the churches were closed to have daily services streamed from the Cathedral of Oslo. And then within very few days, a lot of other churches started to do the same on different times of the day. And some of them we sent on the national channels, and some of them just sent on their own local Facebook channels. And we have also seen that this has been very important. What we did when we started off was to actually have people working especially on the social media moderating part, because that is the interactivity part, which we find very important. So for everything we've been doing on the different social media channels, we have also had teams who have been following up, moderating, answering, commenting, and so on. And this is something that we see will actually take a lot of resources also in the time coming. Okay, next, please. The second Friday, or after the lockdown, we arranged what we called Hele Norge tenner lys, which was actually the whole of Norway should light a candle, 8 o'clock on the Friday evening. And this became very popular. We saw that in the end, it was more than 50,000 who participated, and several thousands also posted photos, as you can see. And this also went much broader than just sort of within the church environment, so to speak. Next, please. We have had lots of concerts from local churches and also streamed on the national channels. And now we have every Saturday from different churches all over Norway. And we have tried all the time to have different types of programs and also different types of styles to actually reach out to different target groups and different age and so on. Next, please. One program that became very popular almost immediately was this Prayers for the Night. 10 o'clock in the evening, one priest has given this kind of very simple words for the night, prayers for the night. This has also showed us that it's not always that sort of the technical quality that of course in general it needs to be high, but for this small program we saw that even though they did this from home with their iPhones or similar, not necessarily top of the notch quality, but still very popular. We asked priests who are also good singers, so they had a short prayer, they lit a candle, and they sung, and this has proved really, really popular. Okay, next. As said, we have been trying to reach out to different target groups. So we started off quite early with special programs for children from what we call baby song, and then also different sort of programs for young children and choirs and so on. We also have had different programs for teenagers, for instance, Minecraft services, and different options on TikTok as well. Yes, please, next. We haven't done only programs that are just kind of faith related or related to what is normally going on in the church building. We have also had daily lunch dates, thinking about people who are been stuck at home and working from their home office. And we thought, okay, instead of having to eat your lunch on your own every day, you can, even though, okay, you have to stay in front of the computer, but you can take part in this lunch date. And that has proved popular. We have had speakers talking about lots of different topics, 20 minutes, and it has been possible to post questions in the chat so that it has been quite interactive. And this is something that we probably also will continue with in one way or another. Yes, please, next. Of course, the numbers are interested. How long are people watching? And it's very tempting, of course, to look at the total number of views, which is, of course, not telling the whole story. We have also been looking at actually how many minutes have people viewed, which is more of an interest when you especially look at the prayer, different kind of prayers and services. So this just gives a small number of what we have had during these last weeks. At the moment, we have just started a thorough evaluation to know what will we do next, because what we definitely know is that we are not going to move back to the 10th of March when the corona pandemic is sort of maybe not over, but at least when we can move back and open the churches again. We think that we will continue to focus on the digital presence, and we will also increase it. So we will probably continue to do quite a lot of what we are doing now, but we will find out what is popular. How could we actually also reach those who are not that active in the church in the normal sort of time? We have a survey who says that we asked how many had noticed that there was a digital presence, and 7 out of 10 said that they had noticed. And then also 3 out of 10 said that they would attend. And you could say that 3 out of 10, that's not a very large number, but it's much larger than what we experience in the normal times. So we see that even though people can say that the real service you can only find within the church building, and we also think that, but still we think that what we have been offering now is conceived as real to many people as well. And I think that is really exciting to see how we can use all these experiences now to actually move on and unfold this digital presence to the next level. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ingeborg. Now, we are beyond the anticipated hour. However, these are not regular times, so I think we are certainly allowed to go a little bit beyond. And we have received several questions that we want to ask of you, our presenters. So we want to thank first all of you for presenting. And let me go straight to the questions. And please, the questions were not necessarily directed to any one person. So I hope that you all will quickly say, oh, I'll answer that one. So here is a question from the PCN Lay Directorate, and the question is, what about the challenge of IT and communications literacy, especially among churches that find themselves in deep rural areas? And how do we ensure that such vulnerable persons are not being cut off in this new time of being church? So how do we ensure that we don't ignore those who are most vulnerable? The question asks something that was already mentioned. So I don't know if anyone wants to sort of dig a little bit deeper in terms of how do we ensure no one is left behind.
Maybe I can share one example from Germany, and sometimes Germany is also a developing country, at least regarding the internet. So, for example, some rural areas in Germany, pastors printed out their prayers and put them up in the local grocery stores. Other pastors went to the telephone and called lists of their parishioners. Others sent out the sermon via the regular postal service. So there are lots of ideas you can use. It's the attitude that you want to go and bring church to the people's home. This is, I think, one thing we learned. So it's not only about being a digital church, you can also do like other ways of doing church, like postal service, telephone, or printed. But if you actually want to do it for us, I think it's not because if you have a cell phone, actually that is sufficient in order to live stream. So it's more from my perspective.
Okay. Thank you so much, Peter. And with your internet challenges today, we realize that you are right in terms of the internet. Germany is still on the developing side of things, but we're sure that that will not be too much of a problem. Anyone else wants to jump in on how do we ensure the vulnerable part of those who are not as connected are not left behind?
I think there's a lot of platforms out there actually that kind of help, especially, when live streaming isn't possible, and not just recording. I've heard examples of, using kind of software that allows a minister to kind of record like a sermon or daily prayers, and people can call up to a phone number to get that information, as well as doing kind of mass email lists. So kind of, I think, if kind of dioceses and places can kind of collect some of these resources, and share what's there can be alternatives that people create, just like what Peter is saying, to the kind of live mediated experience.
Okay.
And I also think it's also the mission of the community to offer the talents of its people for people that are not tech savvy or whatever, to be able also to bring and help them to be connected, because it's not the connection in itself, it is the relationship that is behind the connection, actually. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Which underscores the whole element of being in communion. Yeah. Okay. Let me follow with another question. This is from Ian McLarty, and he says, I see a mix of services being streamed, plus those using video conferencing. I'm interested whether there's a pattern based on ecclesiology, or whether it is the choice of the individual priest or pastor at the local level. I hope some people are not getting in trouble with their bishops, but let's hear what's your take on that. Are they following ecclesiological guidelines, or maybe things are unfolding so fast that the ecclesiology, the folks at the top who are making decisions can't probably even meet to make decisions? So do we think that they're following that, or people are making what is convenient at the local level? Sure, Ingrid. Yeah, go ahead.
Oops, sorry. Yeah, no, I think here we haven't had any kind of restrictions on that at all. And I think there's a lot of different reasons, because I think it's down to what kind of technological knowledge the local priest had, for instance, what was suitable, what did they manage to do. It was something sometimes about cost. I mean, we have some congregations who've done, really fantastic streamings with different cameras and so on. But then, of course, others have had their iPhone, and that's it, more or less. So what we have had a discussion on, or in at least, I think it's coming up, is sort of what type of services are actually kind of suitable for the digital variety, in a way, because it's such a, if here in Norway a normal Sunday service is approximately 1 hour long, and you have the liturgy and so on, and that is it correct just to show it the way you would do it in the church if you are there physically speaking, or is it better to have a kind of shorter version, for instance, and is that possible? So we have had congregations here who have kind of created a shorter version, which is more suitable for the screen in a way. So so we have seen a lot of different solutions, which which I think actually is fine, because this gives a lot of experience, which I think we need, especially on local level as well, that we see what works, what doesn't work. And now it's a kind of time, which is maybe the good part of all this, that now we're just doing things. Instead of just planning and planning and planning before you could do anything. Now we're just doing it and testing it in a way at the same time, which I find interesting.
I suspect some churches after all of this is over.
Could be.
Anyone else want to weigh in? Do we think things are happening from the top down, or is it bottom up, sort of?
I mean, in the case of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America, the message from the head was, please make sure you can connect your people through live stream, but don't do it if it's crappy. So don't do it if you cannot do it right, because it sends a counter message. If the quality, if the service is not held in a good way, I mean, it has to also to represent some of the liturgical dignity of the church that you would expect if you go physically to church.
Yes. What I hear you then saying, Father Nicolas, is that we cannot sacrifice quality for convenience, but that it still has to be of a certain substance.
Exactly. And I wanted to tell you also something. I know the Archbishop has expressed that several times when he said that after the pandemic is over, so we don't know when, but he is going to ask the parishes that set up their live stream for the pandemic to remove them. So people are invited to come to church. Okay,
got you. We have received so many other questions, and of course, in the interest of time, however, there is at least one other question that we want to bring to the table. And the question is this, it comes from Arnie. He says, are we watching online services or participating in online services? And if that is the case, how is the participation taking place? So are we watching or are we participating? And if we are, then how is the participation taking place? Yes, Ingrid.
I think that is a very interesting question, which is being discussed here. And what we have done, and I think this, hopefully we can do even more, but what we have done is actually what I mentioned to, we are very active with the social moderating part also during services, because we see that people are giving reactions in the, in the comments, and we are responding to everyone. It could be only responding by a heart or a like or something, but we get, and maybe this is different between different countries, but in Norway, we actually get quite a lot of very positive reactions that they meet the church which is responding to them. And of course, this is maybe a very small thing, but we see that it's important, and that people are then maybe getting in touch in the mailbox on Facebook instead of in the open comment, for instance.
Anyone else want to weigh in on that particular question of the participating versus observing dynamic?
I mean, as I've mentioned in my presentation, in Germany at least, online services have become more participatory. So people, various means, so it's like the commentary section. So you type a comment, you type a prayer. So you make also, for example, if you do it like on a messenger service, people actively type amen. So it really depends on the way you do it, if it's like YouTube, if it's WhatsApp or whatever, but people are more participating. And it's not like you lean back and watch it, but it's like you actively engage. But this also means that if you lead the service, you have to give room to that. So you have to, for example, also look at the screen. There was like one negative example. So a pastor was complaining that he was alone in his church, but he didn't really see that there were like lots and lots of commentaries and 400 people watching the live stream, and he still complained being alone. So it also the attitude of the person who's leading the worship and try to include the audience, and then it becomes a dialogue, for example, and you have to be a little bit delay if you do YouTube stream. And what you have prayer requests and you have to wait a little so people can type in their prayers, and then you can make the service dialogue and also take courage and wait because there's, for example, a little bit delay if you do YouTube stream and you wait.
Thank you so much, Peter. We lost a little bit of your audio there, but I think we were able to capture much of what you said. We are going to wrap up here. There are other questions that have been submitted, and based on these questions that we have received, we definitely know that there has to be webinar 1. Well, let's call it webinar 2.0, which means there will be another round of webinars, and hopefully within that context, we will be able to highlight some of the other issues that would have emerged from some of the questions. One very hot topic question, for example, was, can we now deal with a theology of online communion? And so we know that certainly will be another very interesting topic to deal with. However, let me say thanks to all of you for your presence and for your participation today. We really appreciated your interaction, and this webinar today was also possible really because of the collaboration between the World Council of Churches and several other ecumenical enterprises or entities. For example, the Lutheran World Federation, the World Communion of Reformed Churches, the Global Christian Forum, the World Association for Christian Communication, and the European Christian Internet Conference. So we are thankful for all of those ecumenical partners working together to make this possible. There will be other webinars as we continue to engage in this topic, but we also want to thank all of you who were part of us. We hope that you enjoyed this time and that you certainly will come again for the next time that we have another webinar. And let us close with just a short word of prayer. Gracious God, we are thankful that as your people, we continue to declare the gospel of Jesus Christ to the world. We ask for guidance, we ask for wisdom, and we ask above all that your Holy Spirit will empower us as we seek to be the church in these times. In the name of Jesus Christ, we pray. Amen. So thanks to one and all for joining with us today. Thank you to our participants. And I invite you, before we conclude the live recording, to just wave to the general audience as a way of acknowledging their presence. Thank you. God bless.
Bye.